fraud. So with that in mind, let me talk a little about the run-up to the election and what was happening. First of all, most of you are aware, I believe, that J. Kenneth Blackwell, the Secretary of State in Ohio, was sort of the Catherine Harris of the 2004 election. J. Kenneth Blackwell, let me just be fair, is a man of principle. I believe he was a principled progressive Democrat in the 70s and a principled progressive Democrat when he worked for Jimmy Carter in the White House, and then he was a principled conservative Democrat, then he was a principled independent, and then he was a principled moderate Republican, then he was a principled conservative Republican, and now is the leading far-right force in the state, hooked up with the evangelical preacher, TV evangelist Rod Parsley, who is openly defying the separation of church and state by preaching politics from the pulpit with over a thousand patriot pastors. He's still principled, and that principle, of course, is towards higher office. He wants to be governor of the state. So J. Kenneth Blackwell was the co-chair of the Bush-Cheney re-election committee. And that's and also he was a key operative in the year 2000 in Florida, described as Bush's secret weapon, the Secretary of State from Ohio, who came down to. J. Kenneth has a way of explaining law, so it always favors the Republican Party. And isn't that the role of the guy in charge of running the election? Since there was a football game just played here, the analogy I use when I'm in Ohio, since there's many football fans there, and they're obsessed with that in many cases more than elections, if the Buckeyes, Ohio State goes to Michigan for that great rivalry, and you come to the stadium, and out on the field you see the head ref dressed in maize and blue, the Michigan colors. And you find out that he is the chair of the booster club, leading the cheers in between plays, leading the cheers at halftime, high-fiving the Wolverines after every great play. And then every single call, close call, goes directly for the Wolverines over the Buckeyes. You realize, of course, that it's not fair. The election was exactly like that. There's no way around it. Beginning, of course, in 2001, 2002, 2003, and 2004, as the Republican Party began to invoke a law, not all the counties, but most of the Republican counties, which said that they may, for purposes of efficiency, strike anyone from the ballot who hadn't voted in the last two federal elections, even if they had voted in local elections. You want to be efficient here. So 105,000 voters were purged in the Cincinnati area alone. Not surprisingly, almost all in the inner city between 2001 and 2004. 28,000 were purged in Lucas County, and that was in late summer, after many of them had called up and asked if they were registered to vote. They were told yes, including one couple that had voted for 44 straight years at the same address. So, first of all, there was massive voter purging, including up to an estimated 300,000 or so if you figure in Cuyahoga, Columbus, and other areas. So that's what begins to set the framework for the election. The Secretary of State is allowing and encouraging the purging of registered voters. Now, on top of that, and this smacks very similar of Florida, if you've read the work of Greg Palast and others, is that what was happening also with the felons. In Ohio, it's a simple rule. You're in prison, you can't vote. You're out, even on probation, halfway house, you can. It's an in-out rule. Now, what happens here is the Republican-dominated counties in the South, Hamilton County, these southwestern, southern Republican counties where the Taft family has sway, gave wrong information to 36,000 felons, telling them that they couldn't register to vote unless a judge signed off on their voter registration. Then in Franklin County, a moderate county in the middle of the state, split between Democrats and Republicans, the Franklin County Board of Elections director, an objective man, whose former job was director of the Franklin County Republican Party, canceled the votes of 3,600 felons. Admitted to me on my radio show that I do that in an average year they cancel 200 or so of felony registrations. But J. Kenneth Blackwell thought it would be a good idea, just to be safe, to go back to 1998 and have a broad list, not just convicted felons, but indicted felons that you're not sure whether they were convicted or not. So I had warned my students about this, and one of them comes up to me, who lives in the Republican enclave of Westerville, where Representative John Kasich presided for many years before moving on to Fox, and said, look, I was indicted on a felony in 1998. I pleaded guilty to a first-degree misdemeanor, and I voted as a Republican in Westerville from 1998 to 2004. This year I moved into Columbus. He was going to my school, Columbus State, and I went to the primary to vote for my hero, General Clark. And I got this in the mail, that they have canceled my registration. Now the broader question is that a fact? Is it a coincidence? Is it a conspiracy? I believe it's deliberate. When you look at the numbers of the cancellations, the systematic purging of the voters, and why do I think it was not a coincidence? Well, because J. Kenneth Blackwell, in late summer, in early September, decided that no voter registration in Ohio, as the groups move on and the Kerry campaign are registering people all over the state, record number of Democratic registration. He finds an obscure law in the Ohio books from the days prior to computers, which says that all registration forms must be on uncoated white 80 bond paperweight, cardboard stock. And he decides to invoke that rule. Any registrations coming into any board of election in Ohio must be treated as an application and not as a registration. Right? I mean, that's his ruling. That's what he says. Now, the Columbus Dispatch weighed his paper and found out his was 60 bond paperweight, and that most of the counties, because now they scan it in, use 20 bond paperweight because the 80, 60, and 40 jam the scanners. So, is that an accident? And in fact, what else he ruled on, and I'll read you a memo that we start the book with. What else happened soon after that is we've had a long history in Ohio that if you're in the right county and you're a registered voter and you've moved, you can go down to the county board of election and vote, and that vote will be counted. Now, Mr. Blackwell decided that generations of secretaries of state from the Republican and Democratic Party had not understood the law. And so he interpreted the law jurisdiction to mean precinct instead of county. So, except for a local ordinance, right, at a precinct level, which there's virtually none, from the county level on up to the president, your vote would be counted if you were registered in that county and had just moved. Now, so J. Kenneth Blackwell says, you know, jurisdiction means precinct. It didn't mean that in the presidential primary, but it means that now. No votes can be counted in Ohio if you're in the wrong precinct.